The family office is an Anglo-Saxon concept coming from the 19th century. It generally addresses structures in charge of managing and/or monitoring the wealth of one or several families with an holistic approach, from investment underlying to housing structures and family governance. When you combine a situation where in most of the countries in the world this activity is not regulated as such, with the fact that these structures are meant to deliver tailor-made services to their owners and clients, you end up with an incredible diversity of company. It may be useful to try to categorize them. There is the single family office, which defines structures set up by, owned by, and dedicated to a specific family needs. There is then the multi-family office, which are working on the same pattern, except that they are servicing a fixed and limited number of families, usually 2 at 5 maximum. And then there is the commercial multifamily office, targeting a significant number of families, in most of the cases, tens, when not hundreds of them. In this last category, we may find quite different types of companies, such as pure investment or management companies, using a non-protected and unregulated family office label, private banking activity for the same reason, and companies offering a more holistic approach closer to the single family office duties, but with a different business model. We can then try to draw some comparisons between the very last category and the two first ones. The commercial multi-family office offering wealth services are likely benefiting from a sizable team with various backgrounds and relies on a fee-based business model with a mix of annual flat fees and/or recurring fees calculated as a percentage of assets under management and monitoring and/or one-off fees related to a specific mission. In that respect, the cost could be quite adjusted family by family based on needs, scope of services, and effective time spent. Where, for the single family office or closed-end multifamily office, teams are usually smaller. It could start with one person, even if some multi-billion wealth family can set up structures with tens of employees, and they are relying on a more fixed cost model, with, however, potential adjustment in managing the number of employees. For wealthy family, the question would then be, when using a family office, what kind of family office is best suited, and how much would this cost? We tend to say that the threshold to start benefiting from a family office service is from 30 to 50 million euros, which is usually the same limit drawn to identify the so-called ultra-high net worth individual category. This is typically when families are considering elaborated wealth structures holding, like trust, holding companies, fund structures, in an international environment with cross-border interaction, in order to ensure a proper diversification of risk in an adequate tax environment. The purpose is usually to improve the sustainability of the family wealth on the long, when not very long run, over several generations in most of the case. The main role of the family office is to contribute to the design of the wealth planning and then put in place the appropriate systematic and professional oversight. Risk management is the key word. In these circumstances, benefiting from a multifamily office extended team is the main driver. The various background and expertise of the team allow cross-fertilization of ideas partially experienced in other circumstances. Besides, the multifamily office is also offering access to high-end IT platform for consolidated reporting and monitoring in a cost-efficient way through license sharing. In terms of cost, as already mentioned, they are only specific and mostly tailor-made situations. However, we experience that the average yearly running costs are usually contained at a lower level compared to the holding cost of hiring one full-time employee, renting an office, and acquiring the needed IT tool. Furthermore, for this contained cost, you get access to 10% of a skilled tax specialist, 20% of an experienced portfolio manager, 15% of an estate planning expert, and 20% of an alternative investment manager, as the case may be. Typically, when the family wealth reaches or exceeds 300 million euros, it makes sense to consider to set up your own family office, a single family office. Actually, this level of wealth implies a recurring workload suitable for a full team, and the running costs charged by a multi-family office are in line, when not higher than, the cost of a dedicated team, from €500,000 or million euro per year and above. Then, the family is benefiting from a fully dedicated solution with a committed team for a similar, when not lower cost. This is especially true when the family wealth is over €1 billion and more. One could then conclude that the choice, multi-family office versus single-family office, is mainly a cost-driven choice based on the size of the family wealth. If the pure cost efficiency is often a global wealth function, there are other parameters to consider, such as the complexity of the situation, how many countries are involved, how many people in the family, how diversified is the wealth, the current and or targeted wealth allocation, is the wealth coming from an operating family business, is it a legacy wealth, and the purpose of the wealth. Is there any philanthropic approach, or is the wealth a source of income from different generations? All these elements will require more or less specific expertise, more or less diversity of experience, and will contribute to sustain the choice of a multi-family office over a single family office, or the other way around, as much as the wealth size actually. Furthermore, in real life, the choice is not always multi-family office versus single family office. It could be the one and then the other, or even both options together. Let me share with you a few examples I experienced over the past few years. The first one is a first-generation wealthy family. In the 80s, an entrepreneur started a new company. He grew over the following decades. After having accumulated some dividends, he considered to initiate a diversification of his wealth and to protect his family, notably in case of his sudden death. He initially worked with his usual advisors, such as private bankers, lawyers, tax advisors, and finally turned to a multi-family office. The main objective were to review and amend the wealth planning of the family, fine-tune the strategic asset allocation, and put in place the appropriate oversight. Thereafter, the multi-family office prepared the disposal of the family business and even contributed to the setup of its own family office, which was created immediately after the main business disposal and populated with 2 former senior executives of the sold business. In another case, a successful serial entrepreneur created his own large single-family office after the disposal of his group. He progressively hired a comprehensive team of more than 20 people with a strong expertise in private equity, direct investment, financial asset allocation. At some point, he realized that in his asset allocation, one could find some direct real estate investment, part as a legacy investment connected to his previous activity and part as a pure opportunistic approach. This asset class was very lightly monitored. After having assessed the situation with his team, he decided to appoint a multi-family office with a real estate expertise to manage and monitor its real estate assets. He considered that the expertise required to efficiently take care of this specific asset class was not part of his current team skills, and the cost of hiring a new team did not match the multi-family office offer. Lastly, we tend to see that the single-family office is very frequently close to the main beneficial owner from a cultural and geographic standpoint. However, sound management requires risk diversification. In that circumstances, a very large single-family office, populated with few tens of people located in the Middle East, appointed a Luxembourg-based multi-family office to monitor its tangible assets and structures located in continental Europe. As a conclusion, needs matter more than cost when it comes to selecting its family office. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Matteo Novelli, Managing Director of the Borletti Group, privately owned investment group and single family office. I'm happy to be here today with you to speak about what is the cost of a single family office versus the cost of a multi-family office. Starting from the beginning, so the family offices exist since several centuries, but the modern concept of family office as we know it today became fashionable during the last few decades in the US and during the last maybe 10-20 years in Europe and Asia. And many families in Europe, for example, decided to set up their own family office after the big financial crisis in 2008 and 2009 due to growing skepticism versus investment banks and private banks. So today, when I meet wealthy families or successful entrepreneurs, they ask me, most of them, they question about the interest of setting up the family office, the single family office, versus joining a multi-family office. And the first question they ask is the right question, is what is the cost of setting up a single family office versus the cost of joining a multi-family office, for example, of the cost of working with private banks. Of course, that's an important question, but it's also a tricky question because the answer is not easy. The answer is not easy, why? For two reasons. The first one is that family office may be very different. And if you pick 10 family offices, for example, and you try to compare them, you will realize that they are all very different in terms of structure, in terms of mission, and in terms of services they provide. And the second reason is that the cost of a family office may be also very different. You have some internal cost or external cost, you have some direct cost, and you have some indirect cost. And it's very important when you try to understand what is the global cost to include all these costs in your calculation. So starting from these two simple points, you have to start defining the mission of your family office. And here, the menu is very large. The family office may provide administrative services for the family. It may provide concierge services, but may also provide a wide variety of financial services, for example, like asset management, risk management, asset allocation, financial planning, etc. And also, there are services like philanthropy or impact investing that are more and more required by wealthy families today. So depending on what you want to do, you need to organize your family office accordingly. So the first step to understand what is going to be the cost is to understand what is going to be the mission of the family office. Concerning the cost, as I said before, you may have some internal cost or external cost. What you have to keep in mind is that internal costs are mostly fixed costs or they are evolving by tranches. Imagine, for example, that you're hiring staff that's on your payroll, and so it's a fixed cost that you will have. You are renting offices, you are buying IT systems, all these costs are fixed. While you can also have some services that you can buy externally, and these can be built on a variable basis. For example, you have a wide variety of consultants or service providers like banks, lawyers, and different service providers that can build their services on a more variable basis. So when you start a family office, almost all the time you have a mix of costs that you internalize and costs that you buy externally. So for this reason, it's quite difficult and misleading to try to give an absolute figure to define the cost of the family office. A euro figure or dollar figure, it's very tough to give. Also because the cost may vary with the size of the family office, and the cost may vary depending on the assets that are under management. So for this reason, a metric that it's my view it's more appropriate, it's a percentage of the assets of the family or the assets under management in the family office. This is something that may be more appropriate also to compare different family offices and family offices with similar mandates but with different sizes. And also knowing that those costs, some costs like for example the cost of asset management services or asset allocation services, this may vary according to the size of the mandates or the size of the assets that are managed. It's also important to consider that before deciding to start a new single family office, you need to be sure to have the right size in terms of assets to be able to keep this percentage cost at a reasonable level. So what we consider, in the industry as a minimum size to start thinking about setting up a single family office in terms of assets, it may stand around 150 to 200 million euros. Starting from this cost, it may become interesting and reasonable to set up a single family office, and you can start to compare your percentage cost with peers. If we have to give a percentage number, which of course is the key of the question, I would say that the common range of the common percentage that it's considered as a reasonable and efficient cost for a family office stands between 0.8 and 1.5% of the assets under management. This cost, of course, can vary significantly depending on the mission of the family office, the number of services that the family office wants to provide, and of course the size of the family office. And of course, as the size in terms of assets of the family office is growing, this percentage number tends to decrease to 1% or even below 1%. It's also important to keep in mind that this number is an indication, and this number usually includes all the costs, internal and external, of the family office, but it doesn't include the indirect cost that you may find in hedge funds or private equity funds that the family office is buying or where the family office is investing. So this is often an additional cost that you need to add on your asset management cost. It is clear that what is important also when you speak about this percentage cost is to monitor this percentage over time. So you start and you may have more external cost than internal cost, but then as you grow your family office, you have to keep running this analysis to understand at which point in time it may become more efficient to internalize some of the costs rather than keep them external. For example, just a common example is the cost of asset management or asset allocation or fund selection. These type of services are commonly provided by banks, and they are built on a variable percentage, and this percentage may range from 20 basis points for big mandates to up to maybe 1% for smaller mandates or for some specific asset classes. So if you run a simple calculation, you will understand that when assets under management are above a few hundreds of millions, these costs may become very significant. For this reason, starting from 4 to 500 of millions under management, it may become much more attractive to hire investment professional internally rather than buying those services externally or working with banks. So if we have to come to a conclusion, I don't want to be too long, I would say that first of all, it's not an easy answer to say what is the cost of a family office. It's difficult to give an absolute number. I would recommend using this percentage of assets under management. A reasonable number is, in my view, between 0.8 and 1.2% of the assets. And I would say that a minimum size to start thinking about setting up a single family office, it's around 150 to 200 million euros. Below this size, in my view, it may be more attractive and it could create more value to join a multifamily office which is more organized rather than trying to set up a single family office which could turn out to be a bit too costly and less efficient. So I hope I gave an answer to the question. Of course, the discussion could be much longer and much more detailed, but it's a starting point to start assessing what is the cost and to start assessing if it's the right time and size to set up a single family office. So thank you for having me here today, and I hope to see you all soon. Bye.
Hi, I'm Paul Westall, co-founder of Agrius. I'd like to start by thanking Serge for inviting me to this event. It's a privilege to be speaking to such a distinguished group of guests today. So before I continue with my talk, I'd like to ask you to think about this question. What percentage of the total cost of running a family office is allocated to staff compensation and benefits? We can touch upon that later on. So for those of you that don't know Agrius, we are a specialist resourcing and recruitment company that focuses exclusively on family offices. Our clients range from well-established families in their third, fourth, or even fifth generation to entrepreneurs that are set up for the first time after a liquidity event. And we help our families with resource planning, with recruitment, interim management, HR, and remuneration reviews. So what am I here to talk about today? I'm going to talk about the cost of running a family office. I'm going to speak about staffing costs, and in particular, I'm going to focus upon some of the interesting findings from our recently published Global Compensation Benchmark Report. And finally, I'd like to discuss some case studies from the clients we've helped over the 10 years of being in business. So, to start with, the cost of running a family office. So family offices are as unique as the families themselves. There is no standard family offices. They range from a 20-man team with a large number of in-house services such as investment management, accounting, tax, legal, management of private assets, concierge service, and so on and so forth, to a 2-man team that is overseeing external service providers. I'll just put a slide here that gives you an org structure of a sophisticated, full family office example here. So please take a look at that. And as I say, this is, fully fledged single family office. So family offices typically have operating costs between 30 basis points and 120 basis points. A recent report by Camden Research and UBS states that family office costs are on the rise globally and approaching around the 1% mark. And this is as family offices start to employ more staff. The entry point at which families can now set up a family office has reduced considerably over the last 10 years we've been in business. Although these structures are significantly more leaner, act more as like a virtual family office. There may just be one C-level member of staff, such as a CEO, CFO, or CEO, with one or two support staff within the team. And we've seen this growth in structure, particularly over the last year, and even more so during the pandemic. And within the last 4 months, we've helped a number of clients set these structures up. And the entry point here can be around the 50 million sterling mark, but I think most commonly it is usually around the 100 million sterling mark. Naturally, staffing costs can vary dependent on the size of the teams, which is, it's an obvious statement. However, research shows that this can equate to anywhere from 30 to, which is more likely, 60% of the cost of running a family office, as the question I asked at the beginning. So I'd like to touch upon some of the findings from our global family office compensation benchmark report. So we've been helping families globally with their resourcing recruitment now for 10 years. And hiring and retaining key staff is one of the biggest challenges family offices face. And over the last 10 years, we found that the family office space is becoming very professionalised and is now seen as a genuine career path for high calibre job seekers. We set to help our clients this in the early days to help them understand what to pay their staff, and in particular when there's a new setup. It's one of the cost factors they need to understand, and they needed to get some benchmarking and know they're not paying above or below what the industry pays. And we also now it's helpful for clients that are existing and been running for a number of years, and they use it for their benchmarking, maybe year-end reviews when they're looking to take on additional staff members when individuals are moving on and they need to replace it. So it's now becoming a key resource for our clients to benchmark and use. And I guess we're in a unique position because we've had access to this primary data, placing candidates in family offices for the past 10 years. But also we've been running, secondary data through surveys and various interviews that we've taken over the years. And obviously, at any point, you're welcome to have access to this data. So just a few points. It's interesting to note that geography and culture does have an impact on the leadership of a family office, which again affects the cost. So, for example, Europe and Asia have the highest number of non-family members as their CEOs, around 71 to 80%, whereas the Middle East have the highest number of family members within leadership positions. I think around about the 65%. And given the fact that USA, which is one of the most mature family office markets, it's surprising that 50% of their CEOs are still family members, which we found quite interesting. Globally, there is a common trend with the size of family office. As I say, they all vary, but if you look at the average, it's usually around 5 members of staff or less tend to be the average number. Mature markets such as the USA and UK have obviously a wider range of sizes of teams, and you can see it's not uncommon to see 20 people plus teams in existence. So, as I say, over the last 10 years, we have seen that there is starting to be a bit of a trend with consistency in salaries. I mean, obviously, there is still a very broad range, and I'll touch upon why. So the salaries can be very broad, basically due to factors such as size of the total assets managed, complexity of the wealth, the actual role that's involved, the culture, and more importantly, the purpose of the family office. Location does have an impact on compensation and obviously costs. So, it's probably not surprising to note that C-level staff, from our rest of the world report, which would include South, Central America and Africa, have C-level staff that are paid less than the mature markets. And globally, there is a correlation between the AUM, the size of the AUM, and fixed salaries. We found there is, if you are managing a family office that has more assets, as a trend, there is a slightly higher salary in these and compensation in these family offices. It's not always the case. There are always anomalies. So, it's not, we're not surprising to see a 10 billion asset family office paying less their CIO than 100 million pound sterling family office. It is not. There are always going to be anomalies in this space. So one interesting fact is that the majority of global family offices pay their staff a discretionary bonus. And this can be, we're looking holistically across roles here, from 21 to 30% of their basic salary. Again, that, when you look into the detail, the more investment-related roles, this can be higher, but this is just holistic here. Asia Pacific, on average, pay the highest, and that can be between 31 and 50% of basic salary, which is interesting to note. So when talking about bonus, this leads me on nicely to another very important aspect, which is obviously one of the significant costs within a family office, is LTIP, the structure of formulaic bonuses and long-term incentive planning. And this is very personal to the family office. There is no one-size-fits-all solution here. Family office bonuses are often introduced once there's been a period of track record. And also, as we've seen a move towards more private investment, private equity, there has been a need to introduce this because the talent that they're attracting to these roles are used to that form of structure. However, I think we always recommend and advise, and it's becoming common, that you don't implement this formulaic structure until you've had at least 1 year in employment, so you can prove what you're worth, and then it may be easier to structure. We can help. We've helped many clients structure these types of initiatives that they all vary. So happy to help on that note. But I think it's very important to note that one of the biggest disagreements we've come across in family offices is when it becomes bonus payments between the principal and the management, the leadership staff. So these disputes can be, they can have a huge effect on the family office. And we do strongly recommend that having these early stages of the process, sorted out. I think most, from our experience, family offices hire for the long term. You want that long-term loyalty. And it's quite common that CEOs will be in the business for 20 years. So it's good to get this right at the beginning. So this leads me on to my, I would like to give you some real life examples on how, on remuneration, on cost, and how we've helped our families. So the first one, which is quite interesting, is a family from Central America contacted us. Their main business was in blueberry growing. They had been in operation for a number of years. The father started the business, and then the son took over. And when the son took over, the growth of the revenue, the growth of wealth was a huge increase over a 5-year period. He'd done a fantastic job. But they also decided that actually they wanted now to diversify. They didn't want to have all their wealth held up within just their one operating business. They wanted to set up a family office. They had that amount of wealth now to do that and make other investments for wealth preservations for the future generations to come. So it was the natural progression for the CEO, the son, who'd done this for the family business, to move over into a family office role. The other siblings weren't involved. They had their own careers, but they were obviously the beneficiaries of the family office. And it soon transpired that they were unhappy that he was getting the same level of income as he was for growing the business. But so we came on board. We reviewed, we interviewed the key principal, the son, the siblings, all the key stakeholders in the business, as well as comparing that compensation externally against the market, against our benchmarks, to see where that stood. And it was quite obvious that they were significantly paid compared to someone from outside of the family. So we made those suggestions. It did not make sense to have someone getting paid that level if they were really looking for wealth preservation. So I think there was obviously other factors to take into consideration. Being a family member, you have a vested interest, and bringing someone in externally, you need to make sure they're aligned. You may be saving costs, but you need to make sure it's the right move. But as an overall realization that it was unsustainable to pay someone at that level for this role. Another very interesting example, and this probably takes on the point of when I say about the purpose of a family office really affects how you compensate and your cost on that. So this was a family that the main purpose was for preservation of wealth, but for philanthropic goals. So he wanted to give into charity initiatives way beyond his life. So when the principal would pass, he wanted there to be this to carry on for future generations, to be able to invest into a lot of charity initiatives that he supported. So it was quite obvious that the investment person running this family office shouldn't have been focused on performance and formulas and growth. That was reducing the cost, increasing the cost, and it wasn't going to be sustainable. So they needed to maybe have someone on a higher fix, but not in a bonus culture. So there could be KPIs attached to performance, but it was not sustainable to have a formula attached to that. So that really helped them reduce their costs and understand the type of person they actually needed for this position. Finally, I wanted to touch upon, which is quite a new thing, is multi-family office. So I mean, when we talk about multi-family offices, there are many commercial entities out there that act as essentially just investment managers, and they just bring on lots of clients, and it's essentially just another wealth manager. I wouldn't know the costing. They have their own commercial structures, and the costs vary significantly. What I'm talking about is I've seen a trend of single family office collaborating with other families to create multi-family offices. And this often happens once there's been a family's been in existence for a number of years, has performance, has a strategy on investment that's worked, and they invite other families to join them to take advantage of that success, but also to share cost. So, this, as I say, there's lots of elements to consider, and I'm sure it's a conversation and another talk on its own. But, naturally here, there is a cost sharing. So you can say that the overall running cost of the family office stays the same. Maybe some small increases, but overall there is a sharing of costs. But what we have found that this really only works for investment-driven family offices. So you wouldn't be looking to share, on tax advice. You wouldn't be looking to share on accounting or management of private assets. That can be quite difficult. So yes, it works, but I think the jury's out to say how is the cost saving really relevant for you, and it depends where you are in your stage. So just in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to summarise that the family office sector is growing. We've heard lots of stats. There's going to be trillions of dollars of wealth transferring from generations. Over the next few years, wealth is moving towards more individuals as companies and as the world changes. So yes, there is going to be a growth in the family office space. And with that growth, there needs to be growth for standardisation and benchmarking across all aspects of business practices. But I think when 60% up to 60% of the total cost of running a family office is allocated to staff compensation and benefits, it's an aspect you really have to get right. Please feel free to download a copy of our global compensation benchmark from our website on the slide above. And any questions, feel free to reach out, give me a call. Be happy to help. Thank you very much.